At 2:47 a.m. on June 19, 1966, Ken Miles threaded the Ford GT40 Mark II through Mulsanne Corner at over 200 miles per hour as his co-driver Denny Hulme rested in the pits. Rain had fallen intermittently throughout the night. The gearbox had been slipping since midnight. The brakes were fading. Radio static crackled with instructions from the pits. Miles had hours left in a race. Ford had been losing for 6 straight years, driving a machine engineers had initially struggled to perfect, journalists had questioned, and Ferrari had dismissed. But the prototype that took years to develop was holding the lead, and Ken Miles wasn't slowing down. The GT40 began not as a race car, but as revenge. In spring 1963, Henry Ford II sent executives to Maranello to purchase Ferrari. After 22 days of negotiations in May, the deal collapsed when Enzo Ferrari refused to relinquish control of his racing division, specifically rejecting a clause that would give Ford control over racing budgets. Ford returned to Dearborn furious. Within weeks, he summoned his executives and issued a mandate that would reshape motorsport history. Build a car that beats Ferrari at Le Mans, not compete. Beat. The assignment fell to Roy Lunn, Ford's director of advanced vehicles. Lunn had worked on the Mustang I concept. He understood automotive engineering from his years at Aston Martin and AC Cars, but Le Mans demanded something Ford had never built, a purpose-designed endurance racing machine capable of surviving 24 hours at maximum speed while maintaining mechanical precision against Ferrari's dominance. The first prototype appeared on April 1, 1964. Ford called it GT101. Ferrari engineers were skeptical. The car showed promise. The 4.2-litre V8 produced 350 horsepower. The aerodynamic body looked purposeful. But when test drivers took GT101 to high-speed circuits, serious problems emerged. The car suffered from aerodynamic instability at speeds above 160 miles per hour. The rear end would lift. Testing revealed fundamental challenges with the design. Engineers redesigned the rear bodywork. They tested again. Similar problems persisted. High-speed instability remained an issue. The prototype needed extensive development. British and Italian automotive journalists questioned whether Ford's timeline was realistic. Some Ferrari mechanics suggested American engineering approached racing differently than the European tradition demanded. Inside Ford, concern grew. Executives questioned the timeline. Engineers wrestled with technical challenges. Carroll Shelby, brought in to manage the racing program, admitted the prototype had problems that required systematic solutions. Ken Miles, the test driver Ford hired for his engineering expertise and brutal honesty, delivered frank assessments that shaped the development program. Ford had committed approximately $10 million to the program. Ferrari had dominated Le Mans for 6 consecutive years from 1960 to 1965. The goal was clear: beat Ferrari at Le Mans. Roy Lunn faced 2 challenges. The first was technical: solve aerodynamic lift issues, develop brake cooling, prevent gearbox failures, and create suspension geometry that could survive Le Mans' demanding circuit at racing speeds. The second challenge was organizational. Ford executives in Dearborn wanted results. British engineers at Ford Advanced Vehicles in Slough, England, focused on making the car competitive. Carroll Shelby wanted a car that could win, and Ken Miles provided detailed technical feedback that drove improvements. The conflicts intensified through 1964 and into 1965. Lunn worked to refine the design. Shelby managed the racing program. Miles tested continuously, returning from circuits with extensive technical notes and specific recommendations. Ferrari watched from Maranello. By early 1965, the GT40 had attempted multiple races. Finishes were rare. Then Ford committed to systematic development, testing circuits across the United States and Europe. The goal was to develop a car that could complete 24 hours at racing speed. Testing revealed consistent issues. Coolant temperatures climbed during extended high-speed running. The massive V8 generated heat that challenged cooling systems. Brake fade occurred after sustained hard use. The front rotors would overheat under repeated heavy braking. Engineers addressed problems systematically. Tires failed from sustained heat and loads. Dunlop and Goodyear developed new compounds with higher temperature tolerances specifically for the GT40. The gearbox required attention. Oil leakage persisted. The suspension needed refinement. Engine oil temperatures ran high during extended racing. The GT40 needed more than just testing. It needed racing experience. In February 1965 at Daytona, Ken Miles and Lloyd Ruby won, giving Ford its first major victory with a GT40. But at Le Mans 1965, all Ford entries retired with mechanical problems, while Ferrari scored its sixth consecutive victory. Ford brought in additional engineers. They worked intensively at Slough and at Carcraft in Dearborn, redesigning components based on racing feedback. Brake cooling required aggressive solutions like larger inlet holes in the bodywork and direct ducting to the calipers. Aesthetics mattered less than thermal management. The radiator system received major modifications. Engineers added cooling capacity and improved airflow management. Weight increased, but reliability improved. Ken Miles delivered feedback in detailed engineering meetings. He didn't soften his language. The car needs better airflow management. The brakes need more cooling. The suspension geometry needs refinement for Le Mans. The gearbox needs to handle the engine's torque at racing speeds. Address these issues systematically. Ferrari received reports about Ford's testing challenges. Enzo Ferrari's response, as reported in the press, emphasized that endurance racing required both speed and reliability. The GT40 program faced setbacks throughout 1964 and 1965. At various races, transmissions failed, engines seized, mechanical problems forced retirements. Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles worked to address each failure. Miles was forthright. Each failure teaches us something. Fix the root causes. The failures triggered serious discussions in Dearborn. Ford executives had authorized approximately $10 million for a program that struggled to finish races. Automotive journalists wrote analytical articles questioning whether Ford's approach would succeed. Then the technical breakthrough came. Working with advanced aerodynamic concepts, engineers developed a revised rear body section. The design, inspired by Wunibald Kamm's aerodynamic theories, used a truncated rear that created more favorable airflow patterns. The cam tail design reduced drag and improved stability. Roy Lunn and Carroll Shelby presented the redesign to Ford management with wind tunnel data, structural calculations, and testing results. Ken Miles provided technical testimony supporting the changes. Ford approved continued funding. The GT40 program moved forward with revised technical specifications. March 1965 through early 1966. The revised GT40 Mark II with the 7.0-litre engine completed extensive wind tunnel testing. Results showed significant improvements. Rear lift at high speeds dramatically reduced. Drag coefficient improved. Rear axle stability enhanced. Ken Miles tested the revised car at various circuits. He pushed the GT40 Mark II past 200 miles per hour. The car remained stable. Miles reported that it worked. For the first time, the GT40 Mark II matched Ferrari's fastest prototypes in straight-line speed while offering better mechanical reliability. Ford intensified production. By early 1966, multiple GT40 Mark II were ready for the racing season. The cars competed at Daytona in February. Ken Miles and Lloyd Ruby won, with Ford taking the top 3 positions. At Sebring in March, Miles won again. The cars were proving both fast and increasingly reliable. In April 1966 at Monza, Ferrari's new 330 P3 won, demonstrating that Ferrari remained formidable. The battle for Le Mans 1966 would be intense. January through June 1966, Ford committed 8 GT40 Mark IIs to Le Mans. Carroll Shelby managed the overall racing program through Shelby American, working with Holman and Moody and Alan Mann Racing. Ken Miles would drive paired with Denny Hulme. There were discussions about driver selection. Miles's experience and speed made him valuable to the program despite some corporate concerns about image. Carroll Shelby advocated for Miles. You want to beat Ferrari? You put your best drivers in the cars. Miles and Hulme would drive GT40 Mark II chassis number 1. Meanwhile, Ferrari prepared its response. The 330 P3 represented Ferrari's latest engineering, lighter than previous models, powerful, competitive. Ferrari entered 3 P3s at Le Mans, plus additional cars from customer teams. Weather forecasts for race weekend showed variable conditions with possible rain. Rain could affect strategy and favor cars with better wet weather handling. The race began at 4 p.m. on June 18, 1966, with the traditional Le Mans start. Ford and Ferrari cars jockeyed for position in the early running. As afternoon turned to evening, both teams settled into their racing rhythms. Ford GT40 Mark IIs and Ferrari 330 P3s traded positions at the front of the field. The cars screamed down the Mulsanne straight at over 200 miles per hour, braked hard for the Mulsanne corner, then accelerated again through the Porsche curves. Rain began falling as darkness descended on the circuit. Track conditions became treacherous. Both Ford and Ferrari teams managed the wet conditions with caution. By midnight, multiple Ford Mark IIs had established themselves in leading positions, but the race was far from over. Through the long night of June 18th into the 19th, attrition began its work. Various cars suffered mechanical problems under the relentless stress of racing at maximum speed. Ferrari's challenge started to crumble. The number 20 Ferrari P3 of Mike Parks and Ludovico Scarfiotti crashed. The number 21 Ferrari of Lorenzo Bandini and Jean Guichet retired with mechanical failure. One by one, Ferrari's hopes dimmed. Dawn broke around 6 a.m. on June 19th, revealing a transformed race. Ford GT40 Mark IIs occupied the top 3 positions. The number 1 car of Ken Miles and Denny Hulme led. The number 2 car of Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon ran second. The number 5 car of Ronnie Bucknam and Dick Hutchison held third. Ferrari's factory challenge had ended. All 3 factory Ferrari 330 P3s had retired with various failures. As morning progressed into afternoon, Ford dominated completely. The question was no longer whether Ford would win, but which Ford would win. In the pits, Ford management began orchestrating something unprecedented. Leo Beebe, Ford's racing director, developed a plan. All 3 leading Ford GT40s would cross the finish line together in a formation finish to maximize publicity and demonstrate Ford's absolute dominance over Ferrari. It would be a visual spectacle, a corporate statement, a moment of triumph carefully choreographed for maximum impact. Carroll Shelby radioed instructions to the teams. Ken Miles, leading in car number 1, was told to slow down and allow the other Fords to catch up. Miles, the driver who had been instrumental in developing the GT40 and who had driven some of the fastest laps of the race, complied with the team order. At 4 p.m. on June 19th, after 24 hours of racing, 3 Ford GT40 Mark IIs crossed the finish line nearly side by side in a carefully planned formation finish designed for maximum publicity impact. Cameras captured the moment. Ford had achieved its goal. Ferrari had been defeated at Le Mans. Then race officials delivered their ruling. Under Le Mans regulations, the winner was determined by total distance covered over 24 hours. Because the cars had started at different positions on the grid in the traditional Le Mans start, they had covered different total distances during the race. The number 2 car of Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon, which had started further back on the grid, had technically covered slightly more distance than the number 1 car of Ken Miles and Denny Hulme over the 24-hour period. McLaren and Amon were declared the winners. Miles and Hulme were classified second. Bucknam and Hutchison finished third. Ken Miles, who had driven some of the fastest laps of the race and led Ford to victory, was officially classified second due to the formation finish orchestrated by Ford management. Miles said little publicly about the decision, but many in the racing community understood the bitter irony. The driver who had been instrumental in developing the GT40, who had provided the engineering expertise that made the car competitive, who had tested it relentlessly and driven it to the front of the race, was denied the Le Mans victory by a corporate publicity decision. The GT40 returned to Le Mans in 1967. Dan Gurney and AJ Foyt won in the Mark IV, an evolution of the J car that Ken Miles had been testing. In 1968, a Gulf-liveried GT40 won. In 1969, Gulf GT40s took first and second. Ford had achieved what it set out to do, defeat Ferrari at Le Mans. But the program came at a cost. Ken Miles died on August 17, 1966, exactly 2 months after Le Mans, testing the Ford J car prototype at Riverside International Raceway in California. During high-speed testing, the car went out of control, flicked violently, caught fire, and broke apart. Miles was thrown from the vehicle and died instantly. His son Peter, who was at the track that day, witnessed the accident. The exact cause was never definitively determined, though the crash led to significant safety improvements in the Mark IV design, including the addition of NASCAR-style roll cages. Roy Lunn left Ford in 1971 to join American Motors, where he later developed the groundbreaking unibody Jeep Cherokee. He passed away in 2017 at age 92. He rarely spoke publicly about the GT40 program during his lifetime, though he was inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame in 2016. Carroll Shelby continued in racing and automotive development until his death in 2012. He defended Ken Miles's legacy in numerous interviews, stating Miles deserved recognition as one of the GT40 program's key architects. Ferrari never won Le Mans again during Enzo Ferrari's lifetime. He died in 1988. Ford's GT40 had ended Ferrari's dominance permanently. Ferrari wouldn't return to overall Le Mans victory until 2023, winning with the 499P hypercar. The GT40 changed endurance racing permanently. Every manufacturer that followed studied Ford's approach: systematic engineering, significant investment, and methodical problem-solving. The modern era of manufacturer-backed endurance racing traces directly to the GT40 program. GT40 chassis number 1046, also known as P1046, one of the cars that competed at Le Mans 1966, survives today in private collections. These cars are preserved as racing history, maintained in their competition configuration. Automotive historians consider the GT40 one of the most significant American racing cars ever built, not because it was immediately perfect, but because it proved that systematic engineering, adequate resources, and persistent development could overcome established competition. The GT40's victory at Le Mans 1966 represented more than Ford defeating Ferrari. European racing tradition met American industrial engineering in a clash that reshaped motorsport. Ford demonstrated that methodical problem-solving, substantial investment, and comprehensive testing could overcome tradition and experience. But the GT40's legacy includes what the victory cost. Roy Lunn navigated corporate and technical challenges for years. Ken Miles risked his life testing prototypes during development, and Miles was denied the Le Mans victory he earned because of a corporate publicity decision, dying 2 months later while still working to improve Ford's racing program. The GT40 is celebrated today as a triumph of engineering and determination. But for those who built it and raced it, the triumph came with sacrifice. If this story moved you, tap like. These engineering stories matter because they show what humans can achieve through persistence and systematic problem-solving. We're bringing accurate historical accounts to light. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching. And thank you for ensuring Ken Miles, Roy Lunn, Denny Hulmer, and the engineers who built the GT40 are remembered correctly.